the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington. Joining me today, Mr. Kevin Dirksow. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's our last show before the holidays. After this, we'll be taking a 2-week break. We'll be returning on January 8th.
Yeah, rough. I mean, unless anything significant happens, yes, that's the way we're going to go.
We are putting an asterisk on that because we do have potential for an emergency show, and I think most people know kind of what we're talking about there.
Right, here's the point to that. We've been preparing for that for a while at this point. So we're just going to kind of roll with that. If anything happens, we'll come back in here, whatever. But since you mentioned that we're getting prepared for that, are you ready for the holidays?
Oh, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Okay, see, there you go. I mean,
I've purchased one holiday gift for one
Okay, that's
person.
Kind of where I was going with it. So
that's why
my answer was going to be half and half.
No.
I've gotten everything that I need to get for other people, pretty much.
Full-blown Ralph Wiggum's, I'm in danger.
But in terms of all the other stuff, am I ready to go out on the holiday weekend that's coming up? Not really. We're supposed to be potentially hosting people, not next weekend, but on New Year's Eve. And,
okay.
And I can't even think that far ahead because of we still got all this other stuff to get through. So
thankfully, I don't have any holiday plans, and that coincides well with the fact we were chit-chatting a little bit right before the show about the fact that the high temperature here in Champaign, Illinois on Saturday is 6 degrees.
Yeah.
So we're not going to be going anywhere. I do have to work that day. But we have no plans that evening. I am going to come home and defrost.
Pretty much. I mean, and we're getting a cold weekend next weekend too in the Philly area, but ultimately,
yeah, we're getting that polar vortex cold.
But it's only going to last for a couple of days, and it's not at one point in time that there was a bigger it might snow, it might not. We're not really sure at this point.
When they show the graphic on the news of the polar vortex coming down, there's the light blue, the slightly darker blue, and then the super deep dark blue.
Purple middle, right?
That's us. That's where
you're in
we're
the middle
at.
You're right in the middle of it.
Right. So anyway, speaking of cold, the Philadelphia Flyers.
Okay.
It's the only transition we got. This week we actually do have a win to talk about, which I assume is not something we're going to have to talk about every week moving forward. But this week we do, and it was completely off the back of Carter Hart. We will talk about that in just a moment. In the meantime, but right before we get into our Flyers talk, make sure to follow us on Twitter at YWT Podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel, find us everywhere you find your podcast, Facebook, Instagram, you know the deal. Okay, so diving into it, 4 games this week, I'm sorry, because we did record last week before the Arizona game.
Right.
Arizona presentation, kind of cool.
It was interesting.
We talked about kind of it being our first game in the small building. Obviously, they've played about a dozen games there so far. The first time we watched and saw it through the lens of our team is coming in.
Sure. I mean, and I look, and you I'll be honest. I know you're going to be honest with this. How many Arizona Coyotes games are you flipping on random? Probably not many.
I watched the first game where the building opened.
Yep. I did that too.
And then I watched a couple minutes of the Boston game the Friday before the Flyers played there. Just because I wanted to see how many jokes Jack Edwards would make about it. The answer was 3 pregame.
Okay.
But I enjoyed it. It was a good environment. It was half empty.
Right. Now let's make something clear about that. And by the way, we're going to because I have the whole thing with the road trip on here.
Yeah.
We're glossing over the Vegas game that we already covered last week. We know how that went.
That's fair.
In looking at the presentation of the game, and this is strictly a presentation, I'm not in the details of the game itself yet. It's not like it's a college building. Yeah. So it's not like they're not equipped to broadcast a game from there and make it look decent.
Right.
The college hockey games get broadcast all the time. There's a way to do it and set it up. It's not like that was an impossible
ESPN 7.
The bigger, well, sometimes. I mean, it depends on how big the network is that wants to get into it. If you're Penn State, for example, and you're part of the, you can go on Big Ten Network and play Penn State's playing Michigan or something like that. You got something, right?
It looked and felt like a college game in high def.
Very much so. I mean, it very much did.
Right, and those college broadcasts are good, like you said, but there's something still feels a little bit almost grainy about it. The NHL has better cameras.
Well, and not only that, but beyond that point of the way it looks on, because I think I mentioned this in the group text a little bit. it has nothing to do with necessarily with the ability to broadcast a game and make it look decent. That's
Right.
not what that whole thing is about. It's the fact that the building wasn't equipped to handle what goes into the behind the scenes of an NHL game. And I'm not talking about the behind the scenes television wise.
Right.
I'm talking about they
literally had to change the visiting locker rooms.
Right. They didn't have an opposing locker room, for crying out loud. And
they were getting changed at the KFC across the street.
Yeah, practically. It feels like it. I mean, let's put it this way. They probably had a better visitors locker room when they made like that makeshift, hey, we're going to play on Lake Tahoe, than they do at that building. Like, probably. Seriously, I when they sit there and they put it together and they go, hey, you know what? We're just going to build a rink on a country club at Lake Tahoe.
I've just tried to completely block out that trip because that trip was so atrocious.
No, I know, but like I'm just no. But if you're talking about from a quality standpoint, where you're sitting there looking at a facility, I mean, it wasn't built for fans. Let's remember that too. Would have been cool if it was, but no, there was no fans at the time,
right?
For the Lake Tahoe games.
Oh, right. Okay.
So that wasn't built for fans. So I mean, if it was, I'm curious how it all would have looked. But like, nonetheless, like it seemed like they put together a cool setting.
I wish they had done more spectacle games in the no fans era.
It would have been a cool idea. I mean, it definitely would have generated more. You get more eyeballs on the screen for sure.
Right. But anyway, one thing I did want to mention about the Arizona broadcast. So because it's a little bit of a smaller building, you don't have 17, 18, 19,000 people to worry about. The camera angle was so much more on top of the ice. I loved it. That is what I want that angle in every building.
Do you want to know what that angle really is, kind of, in a way?
Okay.
And this is something I guess I didn't think about it this way.
Kind of a zoomed in version of the press box?
A little, and this is where I'm going with this. So when I was in college and I would do something like a basketball game, for example, we would be set up at they would put a folding table. The way the gym was where I went to college, there was a track, like an indoor running track around the top portion, like above the bleachers, above the floor.
Right, like a little bit of a balcony. Right.
Kind of. So we would go up there, and that's where we would call the game from.
Okay, almost a catwalk vibe.
Kind of, a little bit. I mean, you're not super high up, and you're not like looking down over anything crazy, but
it's nothing rickety.
But it gave a different point of view, and actually for basketball, that's a little weird because for a lot of basketball broadcasts, you sit on the floor right at the scorer's table.
Right, you want to be as close to the action as humanly possible. Sit there.
I know. Actually, I liked it better from that vantage point because you can see more. I always like to see more unfold than try to strain your eyes to figure out where.
I feel like you can see the X's and O's in basketball you can watch the play unfold exactly like the coach.
But here's where I'm trying to go with this. So we had a specific section, at least for the radio station, because we had a specific connection we needed, and there was only one place they could put us. So it made it a little interesting because we had one basket, literally, and it kind of goes with the view I get from the press box.
Okay.
There's like one net is right in front of you. That if anything happens, you have as clear cut a view as you can, and the other one you have to look really far down, like to the opposite end to see. Right, it's not terribly far, like you can see everything, but it's not right in front of you.
I do remember from my one trip to the press box with you that your seats are pretty, like you can see right down the goal line, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's pretty nice.
So we would be set up in one spot, and then you would move over, and because we couldn't be aligned with center court when we were doing these basketball games, center court had a camera set up that was video streaming the game. And that doesn't change the viewpoint. If we had moved down, and every now and then they actually had us kind of dub over that video because that video streamed on the athletics site for the school. We were doing it for the school radio station. Most of the time they didn't have anybody calling on the athletic stream. They just had a video. And then every so often they would let us kind of pop on. I think it's turned into something like that more and more over the years. But beside the point. If we were doing that and we're sitting here voicing over the video that they set up, well, we're standing right there.
Right.
So your viewpoint on camera is literally what I'm seeing.
You have to do that, right?
So I wouldn't be shocked if the camera for that game was up where the broadcast booth is.
Probably.
And it's literally because at a normal game, if you go to the Wells Fargo Center or you watch a game like last night from the Wells Fargo Center, the broadcast booth is on my level in the press box, and the camera that you're getting is like a level and a half down because it's basically the very bottom of the mezzanine level.
Right.
So you're not getting the same vantage point per se. It's much lower. It's a little bit, so it like you used it as a zoomed in version of the press box.
That's
It
what
is a little bit,
yeah.
But what you're looking at really is it's not the zoom quality, like it's not how zoomed in on the action is it. It's the angle that the camera is tilted downward, where it's like, are you more level to the ice or are you looking downward?
Looking down on it.
Do you know what other place does this kind of? When the
Okay.
Phillies play the Washington Nationals, the camera that's going from behind home plate that looks out over everything is elevated way more. It's
That's
like
weird.
So it looks way further downward, and you can tell the difference. So it's
leave it to the
stuff
Nationals
like
to do some weird stuff.
I think it's just a construction of the stadium, to be honest. Like Probably. It's nothing more than that. But most of the time, you get that same kind of leveled off. It's level with like a certain point of like I don't know exactly what it would be with, but it's level with something. And instead, this camera looks like it's one entire section, like one entire level up and angled downward more. Like it creates a different vibe. Like I see what you're seeing because that's the view I watch most games from here. So, I see that too. So it's a good point.
All right, let's talk about the actual game.
Yeah, let's talk about the actual game. I know. Wild game, to be honest. I mean, that was like pretty crazy back and forth there.
Quite frankly, it was nice watching a hockey game of two teams on a roughly similar level because it felt like a fun, competitive game.
It did.
It's a low-level, fun, competitive game, but it's a fun, competitive game.
It was just it's a wild. It is a wild game in general, obviously, but like there was another, okay, so they give up the first goal and then they come back in the second period. They get two quick ones. They end up giving up two. They get the game tied at the end of the second period. Like it was back and forth, and to an extent, like these are games right now, and this is going to happen again this upcoming week. But these are games because Arizona's behind them in the standings.
Right.
So these are the games that fans are kind of getting up for and really want to see the losses.
Right, and that's the funny part is we're getting up, we're getting excited, but the correct result is a loss.
Well, kind of. And like the point I'm making with that is that you can almost sense the disappointment when like Owen Tippett's goal to tie the game at the end of the second period wasn't great. He just fired from a distance through a screen. Goalie doesn't see it, and it goes in. It's one that sails over everybody.
Right.
And you just get the sense like, great. Like
they're
that kind of goal
out of this. Ugh.
Well, not really, to be honest, because as it was winding down, you started to think maybe they were just buzzing at the end of that when they pulled the goalie and all that stuff. They really just were. And so you knew that something was like, I was not shocked that they got the game tied at the end. You kind of thought, because it's weird because when they pull the goalie, and we'll get into this later because it happened on a regular basis.
Yeah.
When they pull the goalie, it's kind of money on the other side. Like, oh, this is going to like, they'll get scored on,
Right.
But when you're playing a team of Arizona's level, it's not necessarily money, I guess, and it's, they were still bringing it at that time. Let's say this way. They pulled the goalie and got the game tied, and there was still over 2 minutes left.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't like it was down. Like, this wasn't the game they played in Montreal a few weeks back. This wasn't the game they played in Montreal a few weeks back where it took, like, you're taking 5 shot attempts in the final minute, and all of them are either missing the net or maybe just barely going over or close save or whatever the case may be. And finally, with a second left, you score a goal. Like, This wasn't frantic to the end. I mean, they were playing like it, and you got to give props to Arizona in the sense that, Clayton Keller is their best player, and he showed it. Like, he had an incredible game, and, for the first time in a long time, this was, Carter Hart wasn't very good in this one.
No.
This was a rough game for Carter Hart. And,
yes, it was.
Getting the game tied, battling back from, they were down, like I said, 1-0, 3-2, 4-3.
Yep.
That's all good, like for moral victories and things like that. And for a team that's kind of starving for them, like at some point in time, you need to feel good about yourself.
And I was going to mention that is it would have been really easy to roll over and die after that Nick Ritchie goal. And the fact that they kind of started pushing back and they scored pretty quick once that goalie got pulled. I think a lot of fans would have been happy if they had rolled over and died after the Nick Ritchie goal because you're handing 2 clean points to Arizona, and that's good for you in the standings, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think the locker room really needed that goal, really needed that point. I don't know if the overtime hurts that, though, because they held it for the first 3 minutes of that overtime.
It was the same overtime as against Vegas. They didn't play poorly in the overtime per se. It's one mistake and it goes the other way.
It's the same thing. It feels like every overtime game the Flyers have lost over the last 2 or 3 years has been the same. Either they get scored on right away, or they hold the puck for the first 2.5, 3 minutes, get a good push, whatever it is. But the first time the opposing team touches the puck, the game ends.
Because it's become so established that the way to win in overtime is possession.
Yes.
It's the key to the whole thing. So eventually you get the point where it's like, we can't give this thing up. You got to you'll go into the zone 12 times and circle back 11 before you make the attempt to score because you're trying to maintain possession. You're not giving it away that easily on one of two occasions, one of which is shooting it wide and allowing the other team to come back on a rush. And the other is, don't give it up to the goalie who can either get it back to his own teammate really quickly or who decides to cover up. And now you're back to square one. Let's take a face off and hope
totally.
You want this to be a quick sequence where it's like, once the time is there, quick passes in the net and it's over, not give it up in any way, shape or form.
And I don't mind the circling around because that is part of overtime and possession is the name of the game.
Sure.
The World Cup is ongoing. The World Cup final is currently ongoing and soccer has taught us that the name of the game is possession.
That's a whole different name of the game is possession, right. Though. That's
a whole different animal.
An hour or so of maintaining possession versus 5 minutes worth.
Right. So circling back out of the offensive zone to regroup, maybe get a new line out there. I have no problem with that. Mm-hmm. I have a problem with circling all the way back to your own face-off circles and letting two of the other team's guys get off and get the change.
Yeah, I mean, there's just got to be as strategic a way to do it as possible because you're right. If you're circling back and then trying to get a line change out of it, there's a very clear strategy to that as well, which is
don't let them get a line change.
Right. Get them tired. And
because we've seen that win in overtime since they went to 3-on-3. If you get the other team tired, they're either going to take a penalty or you're going to score.
There's actually two methods to the madness behind that too, because one is try to get them to make the line or, to keep the line out there and get them tired. The other is in situations, if you can get them to try to bite, like you're going back far enough that they go, oh, let me try to squeeze that line change in. You might catch them and get a 2-on-1 out of it if you can play it the right way. Especially
if they're dog tired. Like as soon as they commit to that bench, you can catch them.
Right. And it's become even more, when it started, it was very much that back and forth. It was chaos on ice. And now it has become a chess match.
Yep.
And, that is the way it is.
And there's pros and cons to it, but
sure. But going back to getting it tied up and all that stuff like that, because I mentioned it's good moral victories. The team is kind of starving for them. To me, that's exactly that's where John Tortorella is living right now, in the sense where it's like, listen, at some point in time, you can't just you can't bury the same players, the same, all the time.
Right.
And we'll get into that way more later because he's obviously there's some players that are not on his good side, but you can't bury the whole team every single night for the same mistakes or for losing all the time. You can tell that losing's, and this is a natural thing. Losing's not fun. No. And you're a team that we're going to get into the fact that they won a game this week, but the record is the record. And realistically, it's less than the record being the record. We've never cared and nobody does. I can tell my colleagues don't either. We've never cared about, the Vegas game went to overtime. The Arizona game went to overtime. No. They ended up losing the game. And therefore this elevated itself to, I think that by the time all was said and done, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't have it written down, so don't hold me to it because I should have counted this out, but I changed my mind when they won another game this week because it kind of took away from it. At one point in time, I believe it might have been after the Colorado game, they had lost 16 of 18.
Okay.
And so now that would be they've lost 17 of 20.
Yeah.
So the point being, if you've lost 17 of 20, losing gets old quick. And when the thing about this is that they're not I've looked at this over multiple times, to be honest. How many times do you look at a game, and there's been multiple of these in the last couple of weeks specifically, by the way. How many times do you look at a game and look at the final score and maybe you make a judgment off of the final score? Because there's a 4-1 and there's a 4-1 thrown in. The Ranger game, which we'll get to, was 6-3. that kind of stuff. How many times do you look at a game like that, though, and then eventually go back and revisit it and actually look deeper than the final score and go, they were still in the game, though?
Right.
Like, how many of those games are empty netters and things like that, where it's like you're one chance away from tying a game?
Yeah.
That's what also gets old, is forget the, hey, they just lose. It's they're competitive and they lose. Yep. They're in these games where they're out there with an empty net with 2 minutes to go, trying to find a way to tie a game up and thinking they can get on the right side of it.
So are we talking about the Colorado game now?
We're kind of shifting. We're in between a little bit. Like, the Colorado game didn't go like that at all. But my point is that find me a game in the last almost month, really. I mean, like, to me, there's 2 games in the last several that weren't competitive at some point. The Tampa game, where they lost 4-1, they were down 4-0, and the Pittsburgh game on Black Friday, where they were down 4-0 and lost 4-1.
Yep.
Like, those are the only 2 I've got. Everything else, like, they've got a 4-1 loss to Washington, where Ovechkin scored 2 empty net goals
in the last minute.
It was 2-1 with 2 minutes left.
Yep.
They lost to the Islanders 5-2. That was the 10th in a row, and that didn't involve any empty netters. But the game was 2-2 after 2 periods.
Right.
You're right there. You're in a game. The Calgary game, 5-2 loss, but it was 3-2 with 2 empty netters.
Yep.
You're
in games.
Even the game against Boston, Boston outplayed them, and we all knew that. But that game was still 2-1 in the third period with 10 minutes left.
Yep.
You're right there in that game with a team that hadn't lost on home ice all year at that time, and all that type of stuff. Like, you're right there hanging with them, and you're doing your best, but you're hanging in there. Like,
right, and that does go to show you just how tight the competition is at the NHL level. Like, the best team in the NHL and the worst team in the NHL are still having competitive hockey games. Right. And that does go to show you, by the way, how far ahead of the Arizona Coyotes the Flyers are, because there are some nights where the Coyotes just do not play competitive hockey.
I hear you.
Same with Chicago, honestly, and that's only going to get worse after they trade Patrick Kane. Well,
Chicago's a different story, because Chicago, you really can see it. Arizona is much closer to them than everybody like, Arizona actually
That's
probably
fair.
When we look at the overall body of work at the end of the year, Arizona is going to be the better team.
I don't disagree with that.
They are down by 3 points in the standings on the Flyers with 3 games in hand, and the goal differential is better.
Right. Well, that is a good thing for the Flyers. I think that is a situation where the Flyers' injury situation has benefited them.
Oh, sure.
So to speak.
But to your point, the Flyers just lost to, and I'm not trying to jump over a bunch of games. We are going to get to the Colorado game, but the Flyers just lost to the New York Rangers, who 2 weeks ago lost to the Chicago Blackhawks. Like, it happens. There are certain nights where one of these teams at the bottom, like, by the way,
the Rangers also hit a pretty rough stretch there for a
while. They did, but that's what I'm saying. The best teams can hit the rough patch, and the worst teams can hit a spot where they catch a team on a bad night.
Absolutely. Like any given Sunday.
Like, have you picked up on the fact that the Anaheim Ducks have won a few games in a row now?
They
like,
have?
All of a sudden, to kind of, like, let's put it this way, they're not the team that's going to be at the bottom anymore.
Right.
They're not.
For now.
I think they've honestly, like, the way that Chicago
You think they've
looked,
turned it around?
I don't think they'll finish last, is my point. Like, I'm not sitting here saying they've turned it around where they won't be in the lottery.
Chicago is embarrassing.
Right. But Chicago is doing what we all knew they were going to do. Like, none of us had Anaheim here at the beginning of the year.
No.
Not with the young skill that they have. But,
and John Gibson.
Right. But this is what I'm saying. So now you're going to see how it shifts over to, like, eventually Anaheim was going to, like look what happened with Ottawa too. Ottawa was in 31st or 30th a couple weeks ago. Now they're up to 23rd. Like,
yeah.
Sometimes a team just needs to get it rolling a little bit, where you knew something was going to, like, you knew they had better talent than what they were showing. Like,
right, and we all knew that with Ottawa.
No, but, like, there's teams at the bottom. Like, I'm not disagreeing with you on Arizona. There's teams at the bottom where you're like, that's where we figured they would be. But eventually there's also teams that start to put together a few wins, and you go, okay, like, listen, it's not that far of a climb up to certain spots where it's like, you'll get there. Like, it just is what it is. Like,
it's 9 points to the bottom, but it's only 6 points to Anaheim.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
We'll do our bottom feeder segment later in the show.
That happened quick, right? Yep. Like, it happened really quick. All right, so Colorado game.
Yes.
Much more of the. First of all, I found that the whole game was kind of ugly.
Yeah.
A decent start, but you really saw the real Avalanche kind of start to come out here. To keep in mind, still no Landeskog is very long term. I know that. I'm not trying to make it seem like, oh, there was a shot he could come back, but no Landeskog. McKinnon's injury is a roughly 4-week kind of deal. Like it was something about it, like about a month, I think was what I saw. And obviously he got hurt in the previous game. As far as the one thing that was kind of, I don't want to say surprising, but like that was kind of rumbling around as the first game ended when they were in Philly, that there would be some
response.
Yeah, a little, because of the fact that it was so like. It was very clearly off of something where there was contact made. Like it wasn't like McKinnon just tweaked something and then left the game.
It was somebody hit him and Lawton.
Lawton hit him along the boards, and he kind of got twisted along like the half wall where the
I think
where the benches are. And
this was also pretty shortly after that little Islanders home and home where there was some physical contact in the first game and there was a little bit of a receipt in the second game. So I think it was just kind of on the brain.
Yeah, but that's my point. There wasn't really near as much of a response, actually.
More so than thinking like anything from the Avalanche suggesting they were going to, antagonize anything. Nobody said anything post game like,
no.
Like Lawton intended to hurt him or anything.
Right. I don't think it goes like that far. But even so, no McKinnon, but they got Nichushkin back. They got, Lehkonen came back over that time. They're still, as much as it's still kind of a makeshift lineup for them, it's a better lineup than what was in Philly.
It's just a way better makeshift lineup, right?
Well, no. It's a better lineup than what was in Philly a couple weeks ago.
That is fair.
Like you add two players because Nichushkin was obviously outstanding in the playoffs last year, really emerged, got the contract that he did, all that type of stuff. And he's been good this year. No, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But I think Lehkonen's been a huge piece to that team because of the fact that when you needed somebody, and this kind of goes off of the Landeskog thing more than McKinnon, because McKinnon's played for the whole year up until
Landeskog's been down for a while.
But when you need somebody to step up, you look in all sorts of directions, and somebody's got to do it. And Lehkonen all of a sudden has turned into a top line player for them.
Man, I don't know about all of a sudden. He's kind of always had that clutch gene.
Clutch gene, yes. Like top line capability, no. And that's the thing. Like he's kind of turned into a top liner for them.
And I don't think you want him to be your top liner in a playoff.
No, you want him to be second.
Right. But you're totally fine with him running with the top crew for a couple of weeks while you're working through some injuries and your power play doesn't have your big guns.
Well, and if it's working, then who cares? Right?
Absolutely.
Like if he's scoring goals and he's like, because the one thing you're right about is he's got a knack for scoring big goals all the time.
Yeah.
Like it just seems like every time he scores a goal, he's scoring at the right time. Like, but regardless, so they get those two guys back. Like those two guys were part of the group that came back anyway. Lehkonen was center of attention for this one because he had a shorthanded goal and then assisted on the game winner, by JT Compher. So, and it was just quick lapses. I did think it was kind of interesting that this was the game that they decided to go with Felix Sandstrom. I
just chucking him directly to the Wolves.
Well, I thought if anything that you really you give him the Arizona game was my first thought, and then to be honest, somewhere in there he needs to get more work. Like you're going to run.
The thing is, I think you play Carter Hart against Arizona because you're trying to get a win.
Probably, I don't disagree with you.
Desperate enough for a win.
I'm sure that's part of the reasoning, but you're also going to run the guy into the ground.
Right. Well, and I'm willing to bet.
See he's a little fatigued.
Well, and I'm willing to bet that's why he got that Colorado game off. He had a rough time in Arizona, took the night off in Colorado, which brings us to Friday. Or Thursday, I'm sorry.
Right. Well, and then the final point on the Colorado game was just that you saw how they don't stack up. Like it's as simple as that. Like not that you're expected to stack up against the defending Stanley Cup champions with this group, but
right. Well, the injuries were a big story in both games, and you can compare the injuries all you want. At the end of the day, when the rest floats up the lineup, Colorado just has way more depth and talent.
Sure. So, all right, so you want to go to where are we at? No, we're at the New Jersey game. Right?
We're going to Jersey, and this was the Carter Hart show.
I was going to say, can we sum it up in just 2 words?
Carter Hart.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much, this goes back to, he had a good game against the Devils the first time around.
Yep.
When they won in the season opener. It was a good game.
Devils have to not be a fan of the Flyers right now, man.
But this is my point of this. It was a good game. Like, I don't think it was anything stand out because they won the game 5-2. Does he make a lot of saves? Yes. Did he have to kind of weather a storm at times? Yes. But it wasn't the stand on your head, I'm the center of attention kind of game. Like there was other storylines that season opener. This was a 2-1. This game was the John Tortorella formula.
Yeah.
We can only score 2 goals a night. The goalie better only allow 1.
This felt like the Carolina game from earlier this year, where Carter Hart just decided, hey, listen, we're not losing this game. Just go score. Thanks. And to their credit, the boys got him too, and that's all he needed.
Yeah.
Scott Lawton, Travis Konechny.
Yeah, I mean, and it starts to kind of become repetitive with how, some of these games go, because the goal scorers are relatively similar. The story, like, this team has 10 wins all year, and that's not really a surprise. But when you consider,
Two
first
of them
of all,
being against the New Jersey Devils, that's surprising.
One of them is at this point, because I don't think anybody knew anything in the season opener. It was kind of like the season opener. I think when they won, it was kind of like, okay, Jersey's going to be what Jersey was last year too.
But it's aged beautifully.
Well, now it has, yeah.
Right.
Now that win looks really good, and this one looks even better. And you owe it all to your goaltender. 48 saves is ridiculous.
Ridiculous, yeah.
And the thing is it's not the first. It's not the first time this year.
Nope.
Like, he's had some crazy good games, and like. The point still stands with Carter Hart collectively, and this goes back several years, to be honest. Like, he's had an awful couple of years leading up to this season, right? Like, that's no secret. But when they made the playoffs in that 2020 season, like, where things were kind of, when everything shut down and all that type of stuff, he was on track with the way he was winning games that year, that everybody looked at the following year, and it's like, if you're even on pace to win something simple like 15 to 20 games a year, in 3 years, you're going to be a top 10 goaltender in the franchise's history by wins. And that still, I think, holds true. Like, he's good enough that when he wins games like that, I mean, let's put it this way. They got the team in total has 10 wins all year. He's got 9.
Right. And the fact that he's, 23, 24?
24.
Yeah. If he stays, which is a topic we will be getting into, obviously, a lot over the next several weeks. If he stays, he has a very good chance to get into that upper echelon very quickly.
I still think, and I don't remember if I brought this up on the show or not. I think I did in conversation. We did in conversation before.
Yeah.
One thing that goes against you trading him at any point, if you decide to, because I see it all the time, because he's played so well in so many games. I see the same comment all the time.
He's still in points.
No, not that one. I'm saying I see the same comment all the time, which is, if I'm Carter Hart, I'm walking into the front office, I'm demanding a trade because I'm tired of this, right?
He loves being it. He loves it.
No. Well, no. The point is that because there's people who don't think he's as good of a goalie as he is, and the concept is, geez, if you put him behind a better team, you would see just how, like, at what level he's on.
How ridiculous he is, right?
Things like that. But if you're, like, right now, and I saw this point, like, recently, I think I brought it up on maybe last week's show even, if you were to try to attempt to trade him right now, there's really not much of a market for him, not because of his performance, but because of the whole Hockey Canada thing.
Right.
That he is linked to enough that everybody's kind of pumping the brakes on stuff like that right now.
That is absolutely fair.
If you wanted to move a guy who was on that team that is being investigated and all that stuff needs to get cleared before teams are willing to take on, like, hey, yeah, I'm going to make this guy a part of my future. So
that's
right
fair.
now, Carter Hart is a Philadelphia Flyer, and he's going to be for the foreseeable future. I mean, you're already into year 2 of that contract.
Right.
So how much more before eventually it turns into one of these things where it's like, he could be free to go anywhere anyway, kind of thing. Like, how much longer? Because I can tell you right now, for the duration of that contract, he's not going to be, on a team that's any good. Like, it's the truth, though. Like, you think they're improved, you think they're obviously this year is what it is, and then you got next year. Do you think they're getting that much better next year?
I mean, Connor Bedard's really good.
He's still not transforming. Even if you get him, you're not transforming the team overnight.
Well,
there's too many problems, and we'll get into that more later. But there's too many problems.
Well, and it's obviously something that we have roughly a year and a half to resolve. But he probably doesn't sign an extension until that Hockey Canada investigation is wrapped up.
It's going to be tougher to do, I guess.
Look at the situation with Alex Formanton and the Senators. Like, it's a good, talented player. Like, they want him on the team. Like, he would be helping their current roster.
Mm-hmm.
But with the uncertainty around the Hockey Canada situation, they didn't feel comfortable giving him a contract.
And they didn't move, and they couldn't move him, obviously.
And they couldn't move him.
And I think it depends on what situation you're in. Like, Carter Hart already had a contract when most of this came out. So it's a little tough to back off of it and be like, well, I don't want this guy on the team because of whatever. But
if this investigation drags out, if it doesn't get resolved in 6 months, if it doesn't get resolved in a year, if it, it's a messy situation. There's a real chance it doesn't. It just hurts these players for a long time.
It can be. At some point in time, there's got to be some resolution to it because it is affecting stuff like that. Like either that or it's going to be something that in typical hockey fashion, then eventually everybody will overlook it if there's no answers.
Maybe.
It's the truth, though. It's the absolute truth. Like, I'm not saying it should be overlooked, and right now I don't think it is. But if this were to go on and in like a year and a half or 2 years, there's still no answers, and it's like, okay, now we're getting past the point where it's like,
there's still the government involved, though. Like,
I hear you.
It's still an investigation with public funds. Like, it's still a big deal. And
as long as you've got social media involved in it too, because there's a heavy presence with the way that this is being reported and stuff like that. As long as you've got that kind of involvement, it doesn't disappear. You know what I mean? Like, no, and I'm saying that it kind of in a good way.
And it shouldn't, right?
Because it means that it forces resolutions. It forces you to get answers because of the fact that it's not going away.
It will not be swept under the rug.
So, well, it hasn't been, and it's actually probably opened up more situations and cases that you need to.
The 03 team,
there's more
several
cases.
Incidents.
There's stuff all over the place, because, so it's a very messy situation for sure. But like it's to your point, because you're right. Is he stealing points right now? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know if he stole you a point in Arizona. He definitely did in Vegas, and
he absolutely stole you two in New Jersey. Yep, 100%. And a topic that we're going to touch on as we get into the Rangers game. Mm-hmm. I did notice a lot of Philly fans in New Jersey on Thursday night.
Probably. I mean,
no, I'm not. I'm not giving grief to New Jersey. I'm not. You guys are doing a great job. With the proximity the way it is, a lot of people organize trips back and forth, and Jersey's an easy one.
I don't want to make this statement completely because of the fact that there's a distinct possibility that something like this could happen in the playoffs because the Devils have carved out enough of a, maybe not division lead, because that's kind of because the Devils are sliding a little bit. Like, that's another part. I think that's another thing that kind of factors into why the Flyers can win a game like that. Absolutely. At this time. That was a team coming in on a slide, and it's been a little bit of a struggle. Like, they've really had it that, like, in comparison, because that's a team that was going toe to toe with Boston for best record and points and all that stuff like that in the standings. And there's a gap now because
Boston only has 4 regulation losses.
But for a little while, so did New Jersey.
Oh, I know.
And they're
up to 8 now.
So they're kind of in a slide right now. But I still think they've carved out enough of it. I mean, it would still take something pretty astronomical for them to fall out of the playoffs. Like, division lead, I'm not saying that at all. Like, I would not have pegged them to be the division winner this year, and I can understand if somebody in the division finds a way to catch them. Like, Carolina's starting to come right there, and that sounds about right for me.
Meanwhile, the Bruins are going to get the little X next to their team name any day now.
You could practically, it feels like it. But my point being, so I think the Devils are in a good enough position that they'll probably make the playoffs, right?
Yes, absolutely, and barring catastrophe.
Right now, depending on where they finish and depending on who it is, because right now, if you called it right now, and the Devils actually won the division as a result, and there's still a chance they could, it would be against the Rangers.
Yep.
Now that's gonna get you, like, you're gonna get a Rangers crowd showing up to the Devils playoff games. You know that. Like,
yeah,
not dominant, but you're going to get Rangers fans who show up because it's proximity.
Absolutely. Your season ticket holders are going to be very careful about who they're selling tickets to.
Oh, I believe that. No, I'm not saying no. And it actually, which goes into my other point, because the revenues are a big discussion topic in playoffs and also.
Yes.
To me, and maybe this is more of a league thing, but I want to touch on it really quick.
Yeah, sure.
If you're looking at the Atlantic Division right now and the top 3 teams in the Atlantic, you're thrilled. from a revenue standpoint when the playoffs roll around, because you've got 2 original 6s and the 3-time defending Eastern Conference champions, who at this point go cup crazy when it comes time for the playoffs.
And you get Toronto, Tampa first round.
If it were to end today.
Well, right.
But actually, that's not that outrageous to say, because the next team down in the Atlantic Division
is Florida,
7 points behind Tampa.
I have a feeling those are going to be your top 3 teams in the Atlantic when the season ends.
Well, because there's also a gap to like Florida's close to a playoff spot, not Atlantic spot.
And Detroit's not gone.
So so if you're trying, because the reason why revenues are important and it's a discussion topic is because of the salary cap thing. Like Gary Bettman said something this week about the $1 million increase is probably likely to happen, but they won't be able to pay off
for more. It's a whole
they won't,
thing.
No, in his mind, I guess they won't be able to pay off the escrow in enough time to be able to do anything further than that little increase. So you're essentially looking at flat cap again, kind of for one more year before the big increase comes. But if you wanted to make revenues, Boston in the playoffs is great. Toronto in the playoffs is great. Tampa in the playoffs is great. No, by the way, let Detroit sneak in and be that team that whenever they get in, by the way, whether it's this year or next year or who knows, because it's going to be the first time in a while. They went through a rebuild.
Man, honestly, a Boston-Detroit, if that's how it works out, and Boston-Detroit is the first round, and Toronto-Tampa is the first round, Toronto manages to beat Tampa, get over the hump, sets up a matchup with Boston in the second round. We're getting so much salary cap increase. Come on.
It would be great.
And then in the meantime, you also have Devils Rangers. Come on.
That would be like that would be a great first round. Don't get me wrong. But that's the thing. Like the Devils haven't been in the playoffs in how long? Also, right?
Yep.
That when a team finally gets back in, I can I can understand how you're looking at a team like let's just say maybe Carolina, where
out
is
west.
The building.
We'll talk about Carolina in the East in 1 second. You would also get, if the season ended today, you'd get Vegas, Colorado in the first round. Okay, I'm sorry.
The season doesn't end today, so I'm kind of not to burst your bubble, but I don't see that happening. No, but think about something for a minute. Even with the West, it's same principles apply to an extent, because did anybody have Winnipeg up at the top of the Central standings?
Absolutely not.
As far as I'm concerned, anytime you throw a Canadian team into the playoffs, you're getting a crowd.
A Winnipeg, Minnesota first round? Whew, that'd be fun.
Do you think, and I'm serious about this, do you think that Seattle would get excited for their first playoff appearance?
Absolutely.
So tell me how that's a bad thing. You know what I mean? Tell me how this is a bad thing from a revenue standpoint of having new locations and different places that don't make it that often, haven't made it that often recently, get in.
So I can't remember if it was 32 Thoughts or if it was Steve Dangle podcast.
Okay.
But they cited something. Vegas and Seattle. I believe it was 32 Thoughts.
I believe is this the thing about how they're both of them are top 5 revenue getters?
Both of them are
league?
top 5 in revenue.
Yep.
Both of them are also top 6 in ticket sales.
Which just begs the question, and not to tie back to a game we've already talked about or a location we're talking about, but
How many more teams?
No, that's not what begs the question. It ties back into the thing, and you can't figure out as a league the Arizona thing. But seriously, you keep botching that situation when you've got your 2 most recent expansion teams are 2 of the most successful in terms of money, of revenue and all that stuff like that, and selling tickets.
But neither one of them is in a literal desert.
No, I get that, but my point is that they will. Gary Bettman's going to die on that hill of hockey in Arizona is working, which and it's a shame because this is something I said before about Arizona. You've got, in my opinion, one of the best brands in the game, maybe in sports. Your uniforms are outstanding. Your logo is great. Everything about honestly, your jersey is a fashion statement. People would how many people would go around I had one of those jerseys in the 90s as a kid.
I've seen them in music videos.
That's
recently.
what I'm saying. I had one of them when I was a kid because it's they're awesome.
Yep.
So you have something that people should get excited about.
I think
it's just the location of it. You don't like you can't.
I think the new building is going to be huge for them.
It's not that it's my thing isn't that it's going to be huge for them. It's that it's got to happen. Yep. And as much as and there's no guarantees yet. Like they're trying to make it happen. Like I know it's close, but it's like
Gary Bettman is friends with enough billionaires.
Oh, I know.
It's going to get done.
But like in the middle of all the other stuff, right? Like, okay, Vegas has been massively successful, and that really shouldn't be shocking because Vegas is a showman's town. You show up there, you go for entertainment.
And we talked about it on this show. It's great for visiting fans. It's a phenomenal place to put a hockey team.
Do you know what else though too that worked out for Vegas?
Yes, it's good.
Well, no. Yes, it's great that they are a town that it's a tourist attraction, and if you go, like, you could be going just for the hell of it, like you're there, and it's like, hey, by the way, there's a hockey game tonight. Let's go and do that because that's what we can buy tickets for, right? I get all that. But when that team had yet to play a single game, and tragedy strikes in the city, and that's the group that comes out and emerges as like, hey, we're gonna bond with the community. So now they're embraced by their own locals as much as they are like, oh yeah, by the way, it was going to be a good tourist attraction regardless, but they're embraced by the locals too.
Vegas did everything right for the first 24 months.
They could not have scripted it.
Then they started trading away all their stars.
But they're still a good team.
I know. Insane.
The key difference between Vegas and Seattle is that Seattle had to make it work the way that every other team that we view as successful had to make it work. The way that Nashville had to make it work. You know, was it going to work? Like it was a question. Yep. It's a legit question. It's like, is this a hockey town? I don't know.
There was enough money behind.
Oh, I'm not saying
Seattle. And Seattle's just a passionate sports town, right? You look at the Seahawks and the 12th man. The Seattle Sounders have one of the most vocal fan bases in all of like the Seattle Sounders arena is enormous. It's one of the biggest arenas in North America.
Sure.
They are a passionate sports city. When they get in on the Mariners, they get in on the Mariners.
Mariners were fun this year too.
Yeah. My cousin Lauren lives out there, and she's a diehard Mariners fan.
But they got one of and not to mention they got one of the best. Not that we're all of a sudden a baseball podcast, but they do have one of the best young players in baseball right now too. That doesn't hurt either. No, but Seattle's got the Kraken have something going for them that Arizona does as well, which is again, it's great branding. You couldn't have done any better with the logo and the design and all that type of stuff. Like
they color matched the city.
Well, sure, and I get that they did, but
done.
They did in that sense.
No, I'm not giving them grief. I'm
no.
Giving them credit for incorporating
I'm not giving them grief either. What I'm saying though is that then to come up with a logo design that is clearly unique to you,
dope,
but also outstanding. Like you couldn't have done any better.
Dope.
Yeah, you couldn't have done any better. Like that's the thing. So,
top 5 logo in sports, maybe.
I don't know about I don't know if I'm gonna go. I would ever go that far with anything because I don't like to span the sports per se. But I did pretty much almost immediately after seeing those jerseys. I went they're top 5 in the league already.
Okay.
I think their jersey designs are top 5 in the league already.
And there are 6 fan bases who are very, very curious as to who the other 4 are.
Because I don't diss the original 6 designs in any way, shape, or form. Like honestly, I don't.
No, I know, and we're putting the history aside and just speaking aesthetically. Top 5
because I think that another thing that made it such a good design was the color scheme, matching it to the other teams in that area, going with that maritime kind of vibe where it's oceanic colors, right? All right. I know we're off on.
We promised each other we'd keep the show a little bit on the shorter side here. Let's talk real quick about the Rangers. Yeah, so. The Rangers takeover tab that you have up on our screen if you're watching on our YouTube channel.
Do you have do you get what I'm referencing there?
It's not absolutely. The fans were louder than the Flyers fans, and it wasn't really all that close.
It was a home game. I didn't I don't like and
they should have let the Rangers have less change.
I didn't plan to cover a road game this year, but I guess plans change. I suppose
right.
No, it was essentially a Rangers home game, which
has to be expected.
Yes and no, because yes, I expect Ranger fans to show up. Don't get me wrong.
Okay, but can you Can you actually realistically expect Flyers fans to show up?
I'm not saying that, but it's regardless of the point. You should rather Flyers fans show up and sit on their hands all night than have that
But
in
they're
your
not.
building.
But
No,
they're not.
which only fuels the concept that we've already talked about, that as long as people show up in general, no matter who you root for,
No matter what jersey you're wearing.
Because as far as I'm concerned, if you're part of that ownership group, you should be irate and embarrassed by that display. The idea that the building was the way that it was for a home game on a Saturday night, that Rangers fans showed how loud they can be in an opposing building. They took it over. I mean, they're singing their goal song. The Let's Go Rangers chants were very loud and started 10 seconds after the drop of the puck. At one point in time, this is how wild the game got. Like, not, I'm not saying wild in terms of the game was out of control on the ice or anything like that, but this is how wild the game was, where it was in all sorts of different directions. And as the empty netters were going in and all that type of stuff, you had stuff that doesn't even apply to the Flyers going on, because you had at one point in time, there was a Potvin sucks chant and there was a Crosby sucks chant. And it's like,
to be fair, that one's kind of related to the Flyers.
But the point that I was making is that you're sitting there looking around.
I know.
No, because I'll tell you why it didn't make any sense. The Crosby sucks chant went up after it was already like 5-3 with the first empty netter. So the Flyers fans that were there were already going for the exits. So now it's essentially just a Rangers crowd. Sidney Crosby is not playing, by the way.
But that's the thing, is they're not chanting about us because we're not relevant enough to be chanted about.
Maybe, I don't know.
They're already dumping on us. The game's over.
But if that's the point. But this is the point. If you accept this, then there's no hope for you as a franchise if this is accepted.
But the building's full.
But that's my point. If that's what you're accepting, then that's what you are. Then stop being a money grab and disown your franchise, because that's not how sport, like, you shouldn't want it to be, hey, by the way, when the Rangers are in town, we draw a good crowd. I'm sorry, that's not entirely true. You should want it to be, hey, the Rangers are in town, we're going to draw a good crowd,
but it should be full of your fans screaming vigor at them.
Right. Yeah. That's the point. Like but now granted, if we go to the game itself, the Rangers won the game with skill. They made great plays. Key players were showing up. The Keandre Miller goal was outstanding. That's just sensational.
Oh, incredible.
Which, by the way, like, the second that he steals the puck, by the way, everybody that was sitting near me in the press box, myself included, by the way. No, not saying goal, because of the fact that he didn't have the step yet, so it wasn't a sure breakaway. But we all knew the speed that he has, so we even said, "Oh, here we go. He's going to turn on the Jets," and off he was. And what a play!
He sure did. Yep.
You got Artemi Panarin and Barclay Gaudreau score. Barclay Gaudreau gets left all alone in front and then puts the move on to score a goal. Not something he does all that often.
I can't believe that team's going to add Patrick Kane. Ugh.
Is that for sure and certain?
No.
Okay.
But I think Patrick Kane wants to play with Artemi Panarin again. And I don't think Patrick Kane would mind playing in New York.
See, I think that, and I don't know if it's gonna, like cap is gonna be a huge deal with this. I get it, but I think that, hasn't Boston come up for Kane too?
Yeah, I think they would have a harder time. Right, they would have a harder time. I know it is money wise.
But you see the logic though, right?
Yeah, sure.
Then you would put Patrick Kane on a second line with Krejci and Taylor Hall.
Taylor Hall, is that good?
Come on, right?
Or David Pastrnak.
Nah, I think they'd leave Pastrnak up at the top.
Oh, is he up at the top still? Okay.
It goes back and forth, but I think ridiculous. If you added, I mean, I see where you're trying to go with it. You're trying to add Kane to Marchand.
Put him with Marchand and Bergeron. Come on.
Good Lord.
Showtime perfection. Come on. So how many crappy puns if he goes to New York about Showtime and Broadway and come on.
More than you want to hear, probably.
Way too many.
All right, so where do you want to go next? Because we're pretty much through the games, but we really need to talk about the other two things we have up here that are team related, because they're both important. Do you want to go with the guy who?
Let's talk about the personnel one first.
Okay. So we're going to the Hayes one.
So we talked about the games, and Kevin Hayes did not play against his former team, the New York Rangers, on Saturday.
Because Kevin Hayes hasn't played since the second period on Thursday against New Jersey. Let's make that clear.
Yeah. And by the way, that is a point in Carter Hart's favor also, is that he's making all those saves in the third period without Kevin Hayes on the ice at any given point.
So where do you want me to begin with this one?
Why?
Why was he benched?
Yeah.
Because this is an evolving storyline that no matter how much John Tortorella wants to deny this claim, Kevin Hayes is in the doghouse.
Right.
So there's really no denying that. Like, Tortorella's going to say that he's not doing, like, that it has nothing to do with that or whatever. But there's tension building, and I can tell you there's tension building for something that I guess, I didn't have a reason to necessarily use this for anything, but now it really becomes even more relevant now than before. So they're doing locker room a little different this year when it comes to the interviews, or maybe because we haven't been in the room itself, it's been a little different. There's points where the cameras are off when you still can get questions in, because they're bringing guys in like rapid fire, with the exception of maybe the last guy who comes in where everybody's waiting. So then you get whatever 2 minutes or whatever it is, or 3 minutes, and then it's over. So
right.
We'll be talking to one guy, and then it'll be, oh, by the way, so-and-so's over here, and we can get started with that. And you'll go over, and you also have the option, though, that when all the cameras disappear at that moment, when all of the other reporters start to run to the guy that they just brought into the room, you could stay with the guy that was already being talked to.
Get another question or two.
And get a little more in, and the whole crowd's not around, and it's not going to be in the transcripts and blah, blah, blah. I did that with Kevin
off the
Hayes.
record time.
Well, no, it's on record because he's still doing his scrum, but you're asking questions while nobody else is directly there listening. They're not even getting the audio of this.
The rest
you're
of the
gonna
attention is elsewhere.
Right. So I did that with Kevin Hayes after, I guess it would have been after the Washington game, because they were about to go on the road to Vegas. And John Tortorella had said something after that game about, this is a team that's been at home for too long. We need to get out of here. We need to get on the road. And because I had asked, because Torts had said that kind of just naturally, and then I brought it up again to him, like, more asking him the question, is this where, like, does going on the road help you build the foundational aspects of the game that you want to see? Because you're not at home. Like, you're not comfortable. You go and you're staying away from home. You're just with the guys. You're trying to build, your
whole focus is on the game and the team.
Right. And his whole point was, like, in agreeing with that to an extent, his whole point also was, like, we just need to get out of here. 5 games in a row at home is too many. Like,
the boys need a little bonding time.
Right. We really need to just be away for a little while, like, be away from the comforts and things like that. Okay, fair enough. I go and ask Hayes the same thing. I go and bring it up that Torts said that maybe you've been at home for too long and you need to get out there or whatever. And basically he danced around the question and said, I don't want to, I don't want to necessarily disagree because he's the coach, but, so it was kind of like, in a weird way, like, thinking back on that now, it was a little bit of an awkward exchange, not necessarily like for me asking the question, but he didn't agree with what Tortorella had to say. It was pretty obvious. There's
a little bit of, I don't want to call it friction, because I don't know if there's friction, but there's
tension.
At minimum, there is some disagreement.
Well, and that's the point. Like, now I'm thinking back to that answer and going off of the fact that it was something in Tortorella, because that's the other unique aspect of this whole post-game stuff that we do, is we get Tortorella first, which is normally not the case. So we can go into the room, talk to the players, and go off of, hey,
bounce off of what Tortorella said.
What Torts said this, Torts said that, which is, at this point, is basically the major storyline anyway, because it's all in Tortorella's evaluation. It's all Tortorella's trying to figure out it's the who's with us. Remember, who's with us, who's not?
Yep.
Right? So you can tell that Tortorella and Hayes are not on the same page.
Yep.
There's a really good chance that they never will be.
Nope.
You can already tell that that's the path that we're starting to tread down.
And I can say this, that they are both strong personalities. And if they don't mix, I don't think they're ever really going to.
But this is what Tortorella talked about from the very beginning. We're here to find out who's with us and who's not. And at the moment, in John Tortorella's eyes at least, Kevin Hayes is not. That's just the way that it is. Now, there's a new dynamic to this at this point as this goes on, because let's not gloss over the fact that benched in a game in October for the entire third period, benched for the entire third period on Thursday night, healthy scratch Saturday night.
Yep.
And I believe it was the most recent episode of Snow the Goalie this came up on, and I don't remember who necessarily brought up the point. It might have been Russ Joy, it might have been Chris Terry, and it might have a little bit of both kind of bouncing it off of each other. I know it was Anthony didn't really go into this as much, but I know that both of the other two did. At what point in time does this tough love approach that you're like, because that's the way the Tortorella is going to look at it, right? Like, I'm not saying I don't like, oh, he's not in the doghouse.
I like because he needs to be benched.
Well, it's I don't hate the guy. It's just I got to push him, right? At what point in time does pushing Kevin Hayes in this way become something that the player tunes out and says, I'm not doing this anymore. I just don't even want to deal with this.
So something I've mentioned on this show before is that I think Kevin Hayes could potentially be a major problem in the locker room. I believe he is the center of the locker room, and if it turns in a hurry.
Well, it's a far cry from what we were saying over the last year or two, where it was, hey, listen, Kevin Hayes is going to bring all of his buddies to Philadelphia, right?
Right. Well, and I think that's why he's the center of the locker room. They just allowed him to do it. I think I wonder if John Tortorella is scratching Kevin Hayes and benching Kevin Hayes to try to not only get his attention, but to get Comcast's attention. At some point, if you scratch him enough, they're going to ask, hey, why are we paying this guy more than $7 million a season and you're not paying him?
Well, kind of to an extent, because that's where I was going with it. At what point in time does a guy like Kevin Hayes sit there and decide this isn't something I want to do anymore, and then tries to force the trade or whatever, right? Like, because
I don't know what the Flyers would have.
Heading.
I don't know what the Flyers would have to give up to trade Kevin Hayes.
Right now, nothing, because they're not going to trade.
Sure.
Like immediately, I got
in the off season.
Well, even then, it's going to be tough. Like, it's not like it's easy. Now, I do agree with the sentiment, and I believe that the tweet that I saw was from Anthony DeMarco, who does stuff for the fourth period. That was, there are teams out there that might be more willing to take on a Kevin Hayes style contract at that stage of it and say, listen, I'll take the 3 years at $7 million because that is the market value for a middle six center.
Right.
Rather than sign a 7-year contract at the same price for somebody else who's out there.
Right.
I might rather trade something. It's going to be minimal, especially if you take the whole contract.
Especially if the cap stays flat.
Well, that's why I think that you'd have a better shot of moving him with 2 years to go, and somebody says, I'll take a 2-year flyer. Like, after this year, it's still 3 years. I think he's stuck here for another year. And then the cap goes up like $5 million, and somebody sits there with that money and goes, you know what? I'm a contender. I can put him on my third line for 2 more years. I'll take him at $7 million.
Well, if we get the organizational turnover that we're expecting, and that heads in kind of a pointed direction, there's a chance that the team is willing to trade him after this season.
Oh, I'm not saying that they might not be willing to.
And retain for 3 years.
I think that would be a massive mistake.
Really? For 3 years?
To retain on another player, though?
For 3 years that you're already probably going to be bad anyway?
No, because here's the reason why it's a bad idea now versus a year ago.
Okay.
If they didn't sign Travis Sanheim, if they didn't sign Ristolainen, then I'm right there with you.
Okay.
But you've got too much term and time and term and money tied up that you're going to even retaining 25% of that salary for three more years just to get him out of here because he and the coach don't mesh. That's even more of a disaster. Like, what are the odds that John Tortorella's around for the rest of that contract?
How long are we going to be saying the phrase, if only they didn't sign Rasmus Ristolainen?
We're going to be saying it forever.
I know.
Like, all right, so let me put something else this way too, because I didn't even write a tab for this, but this is another part of Saturday in the soap opera that continues for the Flyers, by the way. Lucas Sedlak.
Okay.
Just up and left. Now, he had valid reasons for it. His family is overseas, and he was playing overseas last season, and it was like, okay, listen, you look at the time of year it is. It's the holiday season. You're away from your family. You know, if you're getting homesick, you're getting homesick. I get it. But there's also an element where he came back to the NHL and signed in Colorado to play for the defending Stanley Cup champions, who put him on waivers. And he got claimed by a team that went on a 10-game losing streak, has lost 17 of 20.
And he's getting like bottom 6 minutes on them.
No, he's actually getting an elevated role lately.
That's fair.
If nothing else, he was actually one of the better players.
He's been playing well. Yeah.
The point is listen to what he had to say about it. It wasn't giving me what I thought it was going to give me. Meaning, this isn't as fun as I thought it would be to be playing middle 6 minutes and a more elevated role than the fourth line.
Right.
To be having success individually, like to show I can play at this level. I could go to any one of these other teams and probably contribute. That's not the issue. He's looking at the team he's playing on and going, it's a John Tortorella coach team in the middle of the slog of it where you're like stuck in the middle of nowhere. You're not going to contend. You're not going to win a Stanley Cup. They'd have to waive you again to get you onto a team that would.
Get you a shot, right.
Like, if that's the case, they obviously aren't interested in doing that because you're one of their better players. Now, maybe they would have traded you. I don't know. But beside the point, and he just decides this isn't as fulfilling and fun as it should be. I'm going home. Terminate my contract. And he's up and left.
Yep.
Is that not, like, Kevin Hayes isn't going to do that, but is that not the same thing where it turns out, like, newsflash, players don't want to play on a team that is kind of coached by a guy who's putting his will on the veteran players where it's like, you're going to sit your ass down because you're not playing well enough. And I'm tired of the same mistakes and trying to teach you over and over and over again. And then the player eventually is going to go, then get me the hell out of here. Because what am I doing if that's the case? I didn't sign up for this. And that's why, like, you can hate on Tortorella all you want to, and you can sit there and say that you don't like him and blah, blah, blah for this type of stuff. This is who he is, and we knew this coming in. And could that make him the wrong guy for the team right now that needs to kind of bottom out before it goes north? Sure, it kind of does a little bit. But at the same time, this is what you knew you were signing up for, and to an extent, this is where it falls onto the players, that you were going to find out who's okay with this style of coaching and this way of building it back, and who's not. And that's what he means. Who's with us, who's not.
Yep.
John Tortorella knows every second of every day, right this moment, he's the safest guy in the building. Nothing's going to happen. I'm seeing stuff like Tortorella's seat should be getting hotter for stuff like this because you're sitting a $7 million guy. It's like, no, his seat's not even warm.
Nope. He's about as safe as it gets right now.
Because nothing's going to happen to him because he can continue to state for the rest of the season. He can continue to come out and tell you we're trying to figure out who the team is, what the future's going to look like, and it's all about building and teaching and blah, blah, blah. But even as soon as next season, if you've got to bring back Kevin Hayes because nobody takes him at $7 million for 3 more years or whatever the case may be, if you got to bring him back, you can't keep leaning on, well, I'm teaching. Because at that point in time, he's in his 30s. He can't be taught.
Right.
You know that at that point.
He's a finished product.
Right. If you're stuck with him, which is a very likely scenario, and we already know that he's not on the same page with the coach, like, you can't continue to sit him out and then say, well, I'm doing it to teach a lesson. That doesn't work anymore. At this point, at that point in time, to teach him a lesson about what? That the system isn't working for him, that he's not picking it up, he'd have a year.
Right.
Like, okay, I get it the first 3 weeks into the season when you're sitting there going, listen, I'm sitting your ass down on the bench for the entire third period. I'm not impressed with this. And accountability is not a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. But you can't sit him out of a game next year and then try to pass it off as it's a teaching moment.
Right.
Not for a 30-year-old, not for a guy who's been in the league for approaching 10 years, not for a guy who should know better and who either is picking at that point in time, is either picking it up or he's not. And by that point in time, if he hasn't gotten it, he's never going to get it. Like, you're on the third time trying to send a message to this guy. And maybe it's a message that deep down runs through the entire team, but you're trying to send a message to the guy. And at what point in time is it message not received, message never received?
December 18th, 2022. I'll ask you.
All right.
Who leaves Philadelphia first, John Tortorella or Kevin Hayes?
Kevin Hayes, because of the fact that they'll find a taker as the contract wears down. I to be honest, I don't know that Tortorella is ever going to get fired per se.
Okay.
I think he's got a 4-year contract. This is year 1. I think he could be here for
4 years.
I think he could run the 4 years and then that'd be the end of it. But
I think a lot of where it goes from there depends on where the franchise.
But it's funny, like, because you're sitting here asking me the question about why, like, I didn't realize I had this part written in my notes here. Why wouldn't they eat the salary and all stuff like that? I'm going to say it again because it goes back to this is irreparable damage that Chuck Fletcher has done to this roster.
Yep.
When you are where the Flyers are right now, you've got a roster of players right now that, for the most part, not all of them, but you've got players who can be fine players. It's not like teams around the league are sitting there looking at, and I'm just doing this on paper. I know some of the guys I'm going to mention might be hurt or whatnot, but teams aren't looking around then saying, Sean Couturier is not a good player. Travis Konechny, not a good player. Kevin Hayes, not a good player, right? Even guys like James Van Riemsdyk and Rasmus Ristolainen have a market. Like, it's not like other teams sit there and go, I wouldn't take that guy as a player. I'm not talking to take the contracts out. Take the contracts out of the picture. Like, no. Does James Van Riemsdyk have a market this year? Hell yeah, he does, because it's the last year of a $7 million contract. Any team's going to take it for the rest of the year. Hey, eat half the salary for the remainder of the year, and I'll pay him $3.5 million. Sure, why not? He might help my team in the playoffs, right? Like, teams out there are going to do that. They're not garbage to the rest of the league, right? Somewhere out there, the right fit exists for players like that. Maybe it's just a different role. Maybe it's a different system. Whatever the case may be, they are legitimate NHL players. But that said, when you have a bunch of complementary pieces, you have a bunch of guys, like the idea that Hayes is a good, maybe even a great third-line center, or a Travis Sanheim who's a good middle pairing defenseman.
He'd be a really good fourth. Yeah.
But when you load a team down with that kind of talent, you get stuck in no man's land. You're not good enough to contend. You're maybe good enough to make a push at a playoff spot, and you're not bad enough to be at the bottom, which is what I've thought about for the last week. And I'll ask you the question as someone who kind of watches more of an outsider than like what I do.
Yeah.
Are they really that bad of a team?
Yeah.
Are they, though?
Yeah.
Or are they just competitive enough that means that they're not that, but they're not a playoff team? That's what I mean by, are they that bad?
So
they're not Chicago, are they?
So okay, no.
That's what I'm trying to say. Everybody wants them to be Chicago. Everybody wants them to be Arizona.
If the roster, no, they're not that. I firmly believe that Carter Hart is a major reason why they're not that, but they're not that.
True.
If the roster was healthy, I think they would be kind of that middling team that you're talking about. I think the only reason that they're heading towards the bottom is that, Ryan Ellis is MIA. Sean Couturier is, eventually coming back. Cam Atkinson might show up at some point. We'll get to him in a second. Mm-hmm. When you load yourself down with good but not great players, kind of like you're talking about there, you leave yourself vulnerable to, if your top line center goes out, you're done. If one of your top defensemen goes out, you're done. If both of them go out, you are where the Philadelphia Flyers are, and that is in the Connor Bedard sweepstakes.
Kind of that. Yeah, kind of, because that's what I'm saying. Like, are they just good enough is what my question was. Because I'm getting the sense that they are.
I think they're just bad enough.
Well, no, because they're not. Look, I'm
to
not
get
trying
down into that range is what I'm saying.
And maybe so, depending on what happens, down the road here. Because yes, injuries will play a factor into that. Don't get me wrong.
And they will trade some people off, right? You will probably trade Justin Braun. You'll probably trade JVR. The team will get worse.
I hear you. And okay. And let's put it this way. Here's where you're not wrong about that. If Carter Hart gets hurt for 2 weeks and you lose him and you have to play two guys who are primarily minor league goaltenders because that's really all the experience that they have.
Sandstrom, and then who would it be? Erson,
yeah. Good luck with that when you're giving and I understand that, yes, the structure has gotten better to the point where it's you're not giving up 25 scoring chances, high danger chances anymore. You're giving up 11. I get it, but beside the point, right? That's not going to cut it either way. The team has been competitive regularly. The goaltending keeps them in it, and you saw on the road trip, they got 4 points in the standings.
Right.
4 points out of 4 games, 4 points out of 8, is a decent little road trip, all things considered.
Too decent, honestly.
Right. Which is now it's the way that they did it, where you sit there and you go, okay, now that makes more sense. If we didn't play the loser point stuff, then it's a totally different outlook.
All right.
But the loser point does something for it. But this is why, it's why from the beginning I was so adamant about the Ristolainen signing. It was confusing. Why are you going in that direction? It's why I didn't agree with the Travis Sanheim extension. It's why I can criticize the moves that were made in the offseason where you're giving Nick Delorier 4 years. You're trading 3 draft picks to get Tony D'Angelo, who, by the way, was also a healthy scratch recently. You know, none of it makes sense when you need draft picks, when you need to build it from the ground up, and when you need to not be locked into numerous contracts for multiple years that make it so you're going to be building this thing until John Tortorella's contract is up and you're wondering where does it go from here? Like, what was the point of any of it if for the entirety of John Tortorella's contract, you're sitting here going, we got to build it, because you're not wrong, okay? Like, if they ended up with Connor Bedard, like, is it a turning point?
Accelerates things.
No, is it a turning point? Yes, because any team that gets a generational talent gets something better. Yes. Like, at that point in time, like, think about the Edmonton Oilers for a second. When they got Connor McDavid was not the first.
No.
Right? Like,
no, they had multiple first-round picks in the years leading up.
Like, they already had Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and they already had Taylor Hall, and they had already
failed Nail Yakupov. Right.
But they already had guys, and they were building around that too, because Draisaitl was not number 1, but it was close enough, right? Like, he was right up there, and you're going out and you're looking for, you know, a Darnell Nurse is a higher prospect as well, like a high draft pick. Like, you're building around that, right? You've done it for several years. So when you get the generational McDavid and then put him with a guy like Draisaitl, who's probably going to be the best player in history from his home country.
Probably.
Like, if he isn't already, I think he might be.
Probably is.
But, like, if you do it at that stage of things, when it's like, oh, by the way, on top of all the first overall picks that you had prior, here comes Connor McDavid. Now you're ready to accelerate the build a little bit where, yes, you might make the playoffs and you might make a run because you got the best player in the world on your team, as opposed to having that be the first guy you get, because then you might not pick there again ever. Like a good starting point was Cutter Gauthier. Yes. All right, 5th overall pick. You can see he's got scoring talent. You can see that he can play down the middle. That's good stuff. But is that the only guy you're going to get leading into before, like, is it going to be that? And then, by the way, we're going to have to dip into the, well, I guess for defensemen, it's all on Cam York. I guess for forwards, it's all on Joel Farabee. And that's not to say, like, I'm not saying Joel Farabee's a bad player per se, but he's a guy who, like, Tortorella's even been critical of. He's got to be more consistent, and he can't hide behind the injury, right?
And you can point to the Buffalo Sabres. They got Jack. They didn't get McDavid, but they got Jack Eichel, and he was supposed to be, you know, almost as good, blah, blah, blah. They had to get Rasmus Dahlin, trade away Jack Eichel, get Owen Power to, like, even be a good team at that point. Like, yes, they turned Jack Eichel into assets that turned them into a team, but you don't want the Flyers to draft Connor Bedard, have him for 3 or 4 years, trade him for a haul, and then be good. Like, nah.
No, but you don't. But they don't even have the potential to do something like that, where it's like, okay, like, let's look at Buffalo's. Who turned out to be? I'll phrase it that way. Who turned out to be the Jack Eichel replacement?
Tage Thompson.
Sure. But was that known at the time?
No.
Because you had to make a savvy trade. Because let's remember what trade that was to get Tage Thompson on the Buffalo.
That was Ryan O'Reilly, right?
Yep. So you had to move on from Ryan O'Reilly, send him to St. Louis to get the prospect, to only to have to go through the same process of, well, we're going to have
a 3-year period where we thought Tage Thompson was a bust.
Exactly. But you got to go through it. You got to, what's the thing that John Tortorella said recently? You got to eat it before you can, before you earn it, kind of stuff. Like, you got to build through some of that stuff. And eventually, like, let's put it this way. Do the Buffalo Sabres have a goalie that might turn out to be really good?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it happening today? No. But,
all right. This is a conversation for a future show. I promise we have promised ourselves we're going to try to keep this short. Let's put a pin in this now. We will talk about kind of the rebuild as it moves forward.
That's fair. I mean, we should do this really quick.
Like I said, by the time we have our next show, there's a very real chance there's a new general manager, and this all becomes a lot more realistic.
Yeah.
Cam Atkinson appeared to be getting closer, and then kind of just was put on the IR. Mm-hmm. And we don't really know what's going on. Kevin, what do you got?
I don't have much. I'm not surprised that this is maybe not at the injured reserve thing, but even in the last injury update, he was week to week. And I came on here and I told you at the time, like we were doing a show, and I said, I don't expect to see him for the rest of the calendar year. Now that seems official. It kind of, for a little while, was looking like it wasn't going to be.
Right. It looked like he was going to show up.
The thing about this is, so because right now all anybody can go off of is it kind of came up randomly. It was like Friday night into Saturday that all of a sudden he pops up on IR. The team didn't announce it until like Saturday afternoon, early afternoon, like after morning skate type stuff. It was on Cap Friendly the night before and on the NHL's media site. So at that point in time, we all knew, but the team hadn't made it official yet. And that's probably the bigger story than Atkinson himself. Like,
okay, Atkinson, about it.
No, like Atkinson's health is what it is. And obviously, like, he hasn't played a game all year. This is concerning from a human element. Like, if something's wrong, something must be really wrong. That he was out there. It looked like things were going good. He went on the road trip, and now IR.
He's back on the shelf.
And it doesn't seem like this is, because let's be real. It could have been retroactive. So you call up a few guys. Like, that makes some sense, right?
Right.
This doesn't seem retroactive. This seems like he was placed on IR on Friday, which means that he's out for. Well, I think it's a minimum of 7 days is what it turns out to be. But, like, let's be real. Has he come back in 7 days? Probably not.
No.
And if nothing else, I'll tell you what I think this actually has to do with more than anything also. The roster freeze starts on Monday. So I think that this has to do with that you can move him there and he's already stuck there and there's no back and forth of like, well, we got to try to activate the guy during the time or whatever. I mean, I think you still can technically. Like, although not like they're playing much in the next week, though. They got 3 games before the holidays hit, and then they're kind of like there's some time. So it's not a huge deal. But the bigger story is that this is about optics and transparency, and that the fans are already tired of this from before because isn't this, aren't they tired from Kevin Hayes kept getting hurt last season? Aren't they tired from – well, I'm getting to that. But aren't they tired from Kevin Hayes kept getting hurt and tired from – Sean Couturier hasn't played a game in over a calendar year because he had to have another back surgery for some reason. And aren't they tired because Ryan Ellis was acquired as essentially damaged goods, played 4 games, and no one's ever heard from him since? Oh. Like, aren't they tired of that stuff? Like, so now you add this. Now you take the big thing to me also, though, is you take Cam Atkinson, who was a player who, upon arrival, made a genuine connection with the fans and was very likable from day one.
Absolutely.
And now there's nothing on that front either. So it's Ryan Ellis 2.0.
Probably the most likable member of that team last year.
And a guy who, by all accounts, going into this season, before all of this comes up, is essentially going to be your bridge between the coach and the locker room. Was supposed to be, like, I had him pegged as a captain candidate.
Minimum an A. For sure.
Well, right, because of the fact that you felt like this is a guy who should be able to
lead.
I don't know. Well, no, not even just lead. I don't know. He's got a relationship with the coach already that should help you bridge the gap a little bit. Like, as a guy who kind of got the tough love, like right about now, Cam Atkinson, and I don't know how often, like, I don't know how much he's around in between, like he's at practices on occasion, but he wasn't skating recently. Like, he wasn't skating when they got back. I can tell you that.
Right.
But as a guy who we know is buddies with Kevin Hayes, as a guy who was coached by Tortorella through some tough love of his own when Tortorella got to Columbus, don't you think that would be a good thing to have right now? Like, hey, Hazy, like, I know this is tough right now. I know this sucks right now.
Here's what Torts is doing.
Right. Now there's an element to that doesn't make as much sense for Hayes as it did for Atkinson. When Atkinson had him, he was a 24-year-old kid who, like, he was put through the ringer kind of the way that I'm picking a name out of a hat right now, kind of like I'm trying to pick a young guy. So put through the ringer kind of like the way maybe a Morgan Frost would be, where it's like if Morgan Frost was getting sat down on a regular basis, it's like, well, you're still under 25 though.
Right, it makes sense.
I see the potential for you, and I'm gonna tough love you to death because this is not Pierre-Luc Dubois. I'm gonna push you harder because I know you're good enough for it. And then you turn into something for the rest of your career because, oh, by the way, when you're done with the Columbus thing, you're still in your early 20s.
Right.
And
plenty of time.
Right. There's not that kind of time with Kevin Hayes. Like, I don't think Kevin Hayes is going to learn that anywhere. It's either you're going to go and you're going to fit or you're not going to fit. That's where you are at this point. So Atkinson, I mean, it's good of a resource as it would be to say, listen, one of your buddies from college who played college hockey with you, who also had the coach who pushed him harder than anything to turn him into the player that he was, that we saw last year and all that type of stuff. You know, to have that might be helpful, but also this becomes it's still just a genuinely concerning situation. Like every question that you have about Cam Atkinson, right along with guys like Couturier and Ellis, they're all valid questions. Will he play this year? Will he play at all? Even if he does play, what's it going to look like?
Right.
Like, these are guys that don't make, like, they're not small contracts.
No.
You just extended Sean Couturier. You've got Ryan Ellis tied up for another 5 years of, $6.75 million or $6.25 million is what it is, because Provorov's the 7.5.
Right.
You got Atkinson's making over $5.5 million himself, and that's got 2 or 3 more years left, or 2 more years beyond this year on that, right? What are the odds? Like, how many guys do they have on this roster right now that you're wondering what their future even is?
I don't even know how many guys I want to have a future on this roster.
Atkinson, I did, because of the fact that I just felt like when you're trying to build with younger guys, and he was a young guy who went, and he was a young guy who went through Tortorella, and it was like, you need somebody who backs this approach up.
He would be
right
a
now
great
it's
asset.
Tough.
Yeah.
Because right now it's tough. It's tough to be the thing that's hard with Tortorella right now, no matter who you are, what it is even when he took over in Columbus and is coaching a guy like Cam Atkinson, and there's other younger guys who are on that roster too, there was still like an element of expectation where it was like, at some point in time, Columbus has to be in a little bit of a, not go for it mode like Stanley Cup, but go for it mode like, we got to win a playoff series.
Try.
No, we got to win a playoff series at some point. Look how long the franchise has been around, and we don't win anything. We got to win something. We got players. Right. I mean, Tortorella didn't Tortorella, when he took over, and they did win a playoff series against Tampa Bay and all that stuff like that, you got Artemi Panarin, you got Sergei Bobrovsky, you got Matt Duchene. Like,
yep, that was the year they went for it. They kind of
it was, but at the same time, it's like, you got players. You got to win at some point. Like,
yep.
I don't know that Tortorella has ever been brought into a situation where the goal was, you kind of got to build.
Right.
Like maybe in Tampa. I don't want to downplay that. Like in Tampa, he took over a team that wasn't very good at the beginning.
But we're talking about a completely different era of hockey at that point. You didn't even have a salary cap to worry about.
But with the Rangers, wasn't it go time? And with Vancouver, wasn't it go time?
John Tortorella's always been the go time coach. We even said that when they hired him. John Tortorella is the guy that you hire when the roster's ready to go make a run, because he'll kick them in the tail and give them the push they need. Speaking of guys who don't need a push.
Okay.
What would you say the single biggest problem on the ice is with the Philadelphia Flyers? In terms of like effectively winning games.
In terms like why they don't win games, you mean?
Right, yeah.
A combination of things that all kind of come under the same umbrella, which would be puck management, turnover, structure. Like,
do you think one of their biggest issues is scoring goals?
It is, but like, okay, I'm not saying it's not. But
okay, you know who doesn't have that issue? I'm just trying to transition here. You know who doesn't have that issue? Alexander Ovechkin.
Ovi? Yeah.
Yes. So
I got to admit right off the hop then with this one, that Tuesday night when it was very quickly apparent that he had to, because what they were playing Chicago, so that game started at what, 8:00, I guess, or 8:30?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, so the Flyers were playing in Colorado, so their game was at 9, and I didn't realize, like, I think he scored 2 in the first period, didn't he?
Yes.
Okay, so when I realized that and the Flyers are getting ready to get going,
he scored his first 24 seconds in.
So when that happened, well, I probably missed the first one then.
Fair.
And then in general, like, oh, okay, he's already got one. And then I saw he had 2, and I'm like, I might want to put this. So I was definitely split screening it that night.
I will give the feed the credit. I was watching that game also. The whole game, they had his goal count in the bottom of the screen.
They treated it like the event that it should have been. Absolutely, no doubt about it. And ironically,
I'm so glad Ovi's going to break Gretzky's record on ESPN, and he's not going to do it on the Golf Channel.
I agree with you.
I'm so glad.
I agree with you there. I do still think that there's elements of ESPN that could be better at what they're trying to do.
Sure.
So, I didn't realize this. All right. I'm going to save us the Monday news drop right now. Because
what are he's going to score in Detroit tomorrow?
What do you mean in Detroit? It's at home.
Oh, it's at home. Oh, man.
Against Detroit.
Yeah,
So he's scoring 2, right?
Well, but he didn't score against Dallas. He didn't score against Toronto. No, I know they're tougher teams than Detroit.
No. Come on. He's scoring 2 because
pass Gordy.
A tie and pass Gordy against the Detroit Red Wings. Come on.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like that's like a written in the stars moment right there.
It almost looks like he did it on purpose. If he does it, it's going to look like he did it on purpose.
To have not scored against
Dallas
against
and Toronto, yeah.
Yeah.
So if we come back in 2 weeks and talk about a new second place on the all-time goals list.
You think we're coming back in 3 weeks and he won't have 2 goals by then?
Yeah, you're right. He'll be at 8:15 by then.
I mean, listen, I'm going to tell you right now, if we come back in 3 weeks and he does not have those 2 goals, then I'm going to be one excited person because then there's a game in Philly coming up.
Oh, man.
If that's the case. I highly doubt it, but...
You're right. He's probably going to get there. By the time our next show runs around, he's probably going to be second on the all-time goals list.
I mean, if he doesn't do it against Detroit, when they got a couple games against Ottawa coming up, Montreal, Buffalo, he's going to get this before the new year.
Probably.
I see it happening. Absolutely. By the way, isn't one of the by the way, if he doesn't do it against Detroit, Winnipeg is Friday, and Winnipeg is the franchise.
The team he scored the most
against. Scored the most goals against. So I think that maybe he'll have 2 by then.
I have a feeling he's going to get it done.
All right, let's just know.
Yep, we did our bottom feeders update a little earlier in the show. We talked about the Ducks moving up and Chicago being an absolute embarrassment. Shane Wright update.
Oh, Shane Wright is going to captain Team Canada.
Not Shane Wright. I do this every time.
Oh, I thought that was
Connor Bedard update.
Oh, but that was by the way that was a news drop. By the way, Shane Wright is the captain of Team Canada World Juniors, which is something else that we'll be able to talk about on the next show. By the way, because
that's interesting.
The World Juniors is going to take place right over the course of that break, and for Flyers fans, certainly going off of your point, it is a good time to do the Connor Bedard update because he is on that team. By the way,
yep.
So he will be front and center, I'm sure.
I believe his current, stretch with the Regina Pats is done. He has left to go join Team Canada. He currently has 27 goals, 37 assists in 28 games. He's got 64 points. He's on pace for 60 goals and 142 points in 62 games. And again, I don't think that has the World Junior cut out of it.
No, I don't think so either. By the way, for what it's worth, also, just in light of World Junior, since Bedard is going to be front and center on Team Canada because he's not drafted yet, because this is the showcase for the draft picks.
Absolutely.
By the way, not to be upstaged, in terms of who else is available, but Adam Fantilli is also on Team Canada.
Oh yeah, that'll be interesting to watch.
So
for sure.
Quite possibly your 1-2 in the draft this upcoming year are playing for Team Canada in World Juniors. Might want to watch both of them.
That's going to be very exciting.
And I'm positive that Mishkov is playing for Russia.
Oh, for sure. If he's not, I don't understand. But
so now the top 3 might be there. And I know. By the way, if you're watching Team USA's games, Cutter Gauthier made USA's team as well. So
nice.
Another reason to watch for them too.
All right. Speaking of international competition, Argentina and France are tied 2-2 in the 87th minute. So
2-2.
I'm gonna go
2-2.
2-2 in the 87th minute.
I saw people freaking out about Argentina a few minutes ago, but I didn't really. 2-2. What kind of game is this?
Messi scored too.
Well, of course he did.
Okay. I'm going to get out of here and go watch the end of this World Cup final.
Is that supposed to be free money today? Because I think that there was a prop on that somewhere.
All right. We will be back in 3 weeks. We'll be back on January 8th.
Unless something happens.
Potential for an emergency show in there. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, all of the above. Follow us everywhere. Follow us on Twitter, YWT Podcast, Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Facebook, Instagram, Podbean, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SportsTalkPhilly.com. You can find us everywhere. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until then, like I said, Kevin, holiday wishes?
Yeah, same as what you just said. And by the way, so you want to run off and go see the end of the World Cup. By the way, for your neck of the woods, there's a certain football team that's in town today, too, in about an hour.
I don't expect that to be a competitive football game.
No, I don't either.
But I will be watching it at work.
Of course you will. So there you go. All right.
All right. Next time we see you.
Yeah, let's get out of here. Happy holidays, everybody.
Next time we see you, it'll be 2023. See ya.